Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be with you this morning, to start this morning in Mexico. Good afternoon in Europe. I'm very happy to announce this virtual conference on the vaccine diplomacy that both diplomatic academies of Mexico and Serbia have organized. This is part of a intense collaboration between two countries, in particular during the last months of this year, on the margins of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. We have been working together. On last April, we organized a video conference between the Diplomatic Academy of Serbia and the Instituto Matías Romero to identify common topics on our tasks for the capacity of the foreign service diplomats, but also we have been discussing what kind of topics both academies would like to discuss connected to what is going on at the international level, and we decided to dedicate this session to the vaccine diplomacy. I have to say that it's very important this video conference because it's on the margins of the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relations, and I want to thank both ambassadors, the Ambassador Tatiana Konic from Serbia in Mexico and Ambassador Carlos Felix, Mexican ambassador in Serbia, for your support for this event and for the rest of the events that we have been organizing together as friends and countries that are committed to the international affairs, committed with multilateralism, and I think it's in that spirit that we are organizing this session, that we are very glad. I want to give the floor to my colleagues on the Diplomatic Academy of Serbia, Madame Zorica Povrenovic, you have the floor, and Milan Milanovic. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Alday. I hope you hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Alday, Professor Rosas, Ambassador Conic, I have the honor to greet you all on behalf of the Diplomatic Academy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Serbia. And I would also emphasize our intensive cooperation with the Instituto Matías Romero and also with the Embassy of the United Mexican States to the Republic of Serbia in recent months. As you mentioned, in April, we organized a joint conference on diplomatic education for 21st century. On the occasion of the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Serbia and the United Mexican States. Last month, His Excellency Mr. Carlos Felix, Ambassador of the United Mexican States to the Republic of Serbia, gave the lecture to students of the Diplomatic Academy. Today we have the conference dedicated to two current but also connected, related topics: diplomacy in the global health and the vaccine diplomacy. Like other threats, health tribulations requires also meticulous diplomatic and political negotiation. Unfortunately, despite calls from international health specialists, healthcare has long been treated as a less important political priority. I think until the COVID-19 pandemic that affected many changes in almost all areas of our working and living, thinking, etc. That's why we are here. We and eager to hear lectures of two experts, Professor Rosas and Mr. Pavle Zelic from the Agency for Medicines and Medical Devices of Serbia. I won't take up any more your lecture's time. So, Mr. Aldai, Professor Rosas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Rosas, the Mexican expert from our side, and she has been coordinating our latest journal. We have the Journal of Mexican Foreign Policy. It was dedicated to global health diplomacy, and we're very happy for that. And that's the reason why she will be addressing this vaccine diplomacy topic. Professor Rosas, she's a PhD in international relations from the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. She has a master's degree in peace and conflict from Uppsala University in Sweden, PhD in Latin America studies by the UNAM as well. She's a member of the National Researchers System and full-time professor in the Faculty of Political and Social Science at the UNAM. For almost 3 decades, she has been professor at the Center for Naval Higher Studies, the CESNAP of the Ministry of the Navy in Mexico. She also heads currently the Olof Palme Center for Analysis and Research on Peace, Security, and Development. So she is a truly expert on these matters, and I'm glad to give the floor to Dr. María Cristina Rosas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mexico. Good afternoon, Europe. I'm very glad, very honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen in order to support the points I want to make in this presentation. First of all, I will be analyzing the scope of global health diplomacy in the times of COVID-19. Global health diplomacy was not born in face of today's pandemic, but it has a long history, yet it needs changes and adjustments considering the impact of COVID-19 in the entire world. That said, I have divided my presentation into the following points. First of all, how health and diplomacy need to be revisited in the 21st century. Then I will say a few words about how global health diplomacy and soft power connect. Later, I will discuss if COVID-19 is a perfect storm. Probably it is, not for some actors, but it is. Then I will tell you a few words about vaccines and vaccination in Mexico, the challenges we are facing, and some final remarks. And I pretend to do that in less than 30 minutes, so I'll take my chances. So first of all, the relationship between health and diplomacy needs to be revisited in the 21st century. But before that, we should remind that when we speak about global health, we are talking about health issues which go beyond national boundaries and governments and call for actions on the global forces and global flows that determine the health of peoples. So this is important in a globalized world, in today's world. Global health diplomacy was born apparently in 1851 as a result of the first International Sanitary Conference. At that time, the major diseases that the international community wanted to fight were cholera, smallpox, yellow fever. And at that time, it was mostly in Europe that these efforts were made. Yet, today's world differs substantially from those times. Health is no longer a matter of states only, since actors such as foundations, such as the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, the Carlos Slim Foundation, non-governmental organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, the International Red Cross and such, and of course, big pharma and pharmaceutical companies play a major role in global health. So this is today's reality. Today's premises are public health can no longer be pursued just at the national level. We can do a lot of things at the national level. We can, promote vaccination. We can have better hospital, more hospital beds, more graduation of doctors and nurses. We can do a lot of things within a country, but still public health is also an international issue, and we need to coordinate with the rest of the world about how to best achieve public health for the benefit of the entire world. The health sector, that's another issue, can no longer deal with the emerging challenges on its own. It needs multi-sectoral action and broad public and private partnerships at national and international level. In the slide, you can see a number of factors. You can see the public sector, the private sector, the third sector, and multi-sector partnerships. We need to bring all these actors to the table when it comes to global health diplomacy. And this is not easy because some of them may have diverging, conflicting interests with each other. But that's not a task for diplomacy. Diplomacy is supposed to lead us to a consensus, to a political agreement, even if we have some different interests among ourselves. The other issue I would like to mention about health diplomacy in the 21st century is that health can no longer be seen as a purely professional and technical endeavor. It needs the strong voice and the support of civil society and of political leaders to address the equity and human rights issues at stake. That said, well, as I mentioned before, we live in a very connected, globalized world. This has broken down traditional ways of conceptualizing and organizing the scientific, medical, economic, political, and technological means to improve health, which is why a new global governance is needed as a mechanism of collective problem solving. The approach I have in my presentation is that we need to solve problems. We need a collective problem solving. Collective because we have many actors involved in health around the world. So we need a collective problem solving strategy for improved health through the interplay of different institutional forms and actors at different levels. Yet, like other forms of governance, and I'm sure we all know that, it is subject to reconfigurations of power, and it is therefore always also a political undertaking. We cannot take political issues out of the picture. So we're witnessing an increased role of health in global and foreign affairs, including in particular trade and security, as exemplified in the 21st century's epidemics, pandemics, and fears of biological terrorism. Health is now part of the G8, G7 summits, the UN General Assembly debates, the UN Security Council sessions. There has been resolutions at the United Nations Security Council on Ebola, and there's been meetings on COVID-19 and such. And there's also the discussion of health when we talk about poverty reduction strategies, sustainable development goals, and such and such. And at this point, I would like to address the relevance of soft power, because we are witnessing a lot of that in today's pandemic in international relations. The importance assigned to soft power strategies after the end of the Cold War and the role health plays within such approaches is becoming more relevant. The recognition that certain global public goods need to be negotiated and ensure that regimes in the area of trade and economic development need to be complemented by other goods such as health is gaining a momentum. Health is a global common, and many countries have stated that vaccines need to be a global common. China has mentioned that, for instance. But unfortunately, health diplomacy means different things to different actors. We have already explained that global health diplomacy needs to bring to the negotiating table, to the negotiations table, a number of actors, state and non-state actors. But that is not necessarily what different actors think when we speak about global health diplomacy. For example, certain states, global health diplomacy is an opportunity under the current circumstances to advance their interests, and that's understandable. There's no problem with that. The SARS-CoV-2 pandemic underlines the importance of maintaining collaborative relationship for business, tourism, aid, and sharing limited resources, including treatment drugs and vaccines, is becoming increasingly evident. I'm going to show you some figures about how vaccination is progressing in the world and what type of vaccines are being used in the world, and in Mexico, of course. China and Russia have adopted an approach due as health diplomacy, helping other nations during the crisis. We have seen a lot of support with medical appliances and now vaccines coming from Russia and China and spread out through the world. China and Russia's aid in the form of shipments of protection equipment, medical supplies, and vaccines have reached several nations from Italy, Czech Republic, Serbia, Argentina, Mexico, Africa, and so. China and Russia's distribution of contextually important resources have been a significant part of their foreign policies and may help their international perceptions and position in the years to come. And that's a fact. The two countries have been sanctioned by the international community, as we know. China due to the Tiananmen crisis and Russia due to the Ukraine crisis. But hopefully, with this cooperation, with this health diplomacy they are developing, they may have a better perception and improve their position to the eyes of the world in the years to come. Now, I would like, and I put this in red because it's very important, the two countries are providers of vaccines, but the departure point for each country is different. You can see Russia here with 5.5 million confirmed cases, COVID-19 confirmed cases, and 132 and so diseases. And China is in a very much different situation. China has 103, almost 104,000 confirmed cases and almost 5,000 diseases. This is to say that China seems to be in a much better position to deliver vaccines to the world because it has the epidemic under control. And this is from the very beginning. China shut down the country, as we remember, and that has paid off to the Chinese government. And of course, China is now a major provider of vaccines. If it keeps the epidemic under control, it will continue being the major deliverance of vaccines into the world. Russia now is having a problem because the vaccination rate in Russia is showing a slow progress. And there's also claim from Russians that they want vaccines. But Russia also has committed to sell vaccines to the world. And this is creating a difficult situation for Russia. Now, here you can see some of the countries that have benefited from Chinese and Russian vaccines. And it's very clear that there is, of course, a geopolitical situation here where North America, by that I mean the US and Canada and Western Europe have not recognized Russian and Chinese vaccines as proper vaccines to fight COVID-19. And I believe this has to do mostly with some political reasons, but we can discuss that. This is another map where you can see the vaccine diplomacy of China and Russia throughout the world. And in Latin America and Mexico, we are getting Russian and Chinese vaccines as well. And some other Latin American countries are also benefiting from this vaccine diplomacy. Apart from that, I would like to mention other actors. We have mentioned two very important state actors, Russia and China, that provide vaccines. But we also have big pharma. We have the pharmaceutical companies. And their role has become more prominent because the pandemic has weakened some of the government's core functions, such as the delivery of public services and increased vulnerability to corruption. This has created a momentum for pharmaceutical companies whose profile has dramatically changed during the pandemic. Thus, in order to deliver vaccines, they have asked for specific concessions, such as not assuming responsibility in case their vaccines have undesired side effects on people. And I'm sure we all know the situation with Pfizer. Pfizer signs contracts with countries and specifies that it doesn't assume responsibility for side effects on people who gets the Pfizer vaccine, which is why the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, rejected Pfizer and rejected the contract with this pharmaceutical company. And he favored instead Chinese and Russian vaccines. Now, here is a lot of information you already have about the most prominent private private companies that produce COVID-19 vaccines. It is the case of Pfizer, whose profile and economic gains have increased dramatically because it was the first company whose vaccine was authorized in the United States for emergency use, as we all know. And then we have Moderna, also improving its profile and its economic gains. We have Johnson & Johnson, that is a one-dose vaccine. Although I understand that there were high hopes on this vaccine in the US, and it has some side effects, undesired side effects, that have prevented this vaccine from being used widely, especially in remote areas. The hopes of the American government was that this vaccine would be the key vaccine to reach remote areas, and it's not working properly, so it's a pity. But again, the profile of Johnson & Johnson increased dramatically, and it has had economic gains. We have, of course, AstraZeneca. It's very important, AstraZeneca for Mexico, because the Mexican government, the Carlos Slim Foundation, and the Argentinian government reached an agreement with this corporation for the provision of vaccines, and this is the most important vaccine we are getting in Mexico. I will show you a graph later during my presentation. The profile of AstraZeneca has also increased, and AstraZeneca has said that it doesn't want to profit from the pandemic, that it's going to deliver the vaccines at a very affordable price, which is great because we know that other companies are increasing the prices of their vaccines. We also have Sinovac. Sinovac is also increasing its profile. This is a vaccine that is reaching many, many countries at this point. We also have, of course, the Sputnik 5 vaccine by Gamaleya Institute that uses adenovirus vaccine, one of the best vaccines in the world. It has been demonstrated by very serious studies that it is one of the best. It ranks among the 3 top best vaccines against coronavirus, together with Pfizer and AstraZeneca's. And it is not clear the economic benefits, but possibly we are speaking about billions. So there's also this, when we speak about the Russian vaccine. We have Novavax, and the figures, the economic gains have not been released, but they expect $1 billion also. And CureVac, this seems to be a very important vaccine because it is a one-dose vaccine. It's a second-generation COVID vaccine developed by the Germans, and it's expected to be used in remote areas in low-income countries. And price. It's been said by CureVac needs to have a profit. So let's wait and see. So this is the situation. Which vaccine has greater global reach? It's been Pfizer-BioNTech, that has been favored by Western countries, by Israel, by the US. It was the first vaccine approved in the US, as we already mentioned. Then comes AstraZeneca, then Moderna, then Sinopharm, Sputnik, Sinovac, and Covaxin from India. And then you have what I was mentioning. This graph shows the countries dominating vaccine production in the world. And we have China on the top. And this has to do with the fact that China has the pandemic under control within its territory. And let's hope it stays that way. I don't know what we would do if China doesn't have the pandemic under control. That would be a nightmare for the world. It would be a tragedy, a collapse for the world. So it's very good that China has the pandemic under control, because this is the reason it can send vaccines to all nations in the world, to all nations who want to have this vaccine. Then comes the US, then Germany, Belgium, India, UK, Netherlands, Belgium, Russia, Switzerland, South Korea, Brazil, and South Africa. Remember that Russia has very limited production capabilities. Now is licensing the production of a Sputnik, the Sputnik vaccine, to different countries. Mexico is going to be producing Sputnik vaccines as well, due to the agreements we have reached with the Russian government. But still, Russia has smaller production capabilities as opposed to China's. Of course, we have seen major buying initiatives by countries who can do this, yes, countries that have anticipated the purchasing of vaccines in the world. We have the European Union as a leading area in buying vaccines, then the US, Japan, Canada, the UK. We have the COVAX initiative, which is extremely important. We have India. You can see Mexico down to the left at 2%. Mexico has purchased 2% of the world's vaccines at this point. But of course, the pandemic is transforming global vaccine production. You can see that prior the pandemic, prior to the existence of COVID-19, the global production of vaccines was around 5 billion. Now we are having, what, 11.54 billion. So this has more than doubled due to the pandemic, and that's a fact. We should keep an eye on that. Very quickly, I would like to move to the situation of vaccine production in Mexico. Production of vaccines in Mexico started in 1939. There was a commitment by the Mexican government that we should have a syringe in one hand and a rifle on the other. The rifle to defend the sovereignty of the country, and the syringe to vaccinate people. So vaccination was a key issue in Mexico after the revolution. And many brigades were organized within the country to provide vaccines for the population, even in remote areas. You know, for example, that smallpox was eradicated, according to the WHO, in 1980, right? In 1980, smallpox was the first and so far the only disease eradicated from the world. But in Mexico and Latin America, we eradicated smallpox at the end of the 40s and beginning of the 50s. And this is because we put a lot of attention in vaccination for the population. So this is a story. This is how it began in our country. In 1970, the WHO recognized the National Institute of Virology in Mexico as a regional reference center for vaccines. This governmental institution produces vaccines against rabies, the meningitis vaccine, the tetanus, the polio vaccines, covering approximately 90% of vaccines required from 1956 to 1960. In 1999, the Mexican government founded Birmex. Birmex is a general biologic and reactives from Mexico company. And Birmex is of critical importance because Birmex imports, control, and distributes about 20 million doses of seasonal and pandemic influenza vaccine delivered to health institutions throughout the country. The company is responsible for manufacturing 25 million polio, the polio vaccine doses, and 12 million diphtheria and tetanus doses, which covers the national demand. Birmex plants can produce up to 100 million vaccines a year, as well as 2 antidotes against the venom of scorpions and vipers. But in 1998, when the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, the MMR, was introduced, it didn't exist before it was introduced in our country until 1998. Mexico ceased to be self-sufficient in vaccines production. And this is a major change in the country. Back in the 60s and 70s, Mexico exported vaccines for the immunization of children to 14 countries in the world. But in 1998, we ceased to be self-sufficient in vaccines production. Therefore, Mexico established a technology transfer agreement with Sanofi Pasteur, France, to produce viral vaccines like rabies, polio, and seasonal pandemic influenza vaccines. From 25 vaccines included in its expanded program of immunization, Mexico ensures only a quarter of this demand. So the rest must be imported. Currently, the pharmaceutical industry in Mexico is the second largest industry in Latin America, second only to Brazil's, and ranks 12th around the world. The total value of pharmaceutical products in Mexico is 94 billion Mexican pesos, representing 1.2% of the national gross domestic product. And well, Mexico in 2018 imported 318 million of vaccines for human use and exported $24.7 million vaccines primarily to France because of this agreement we have with Sanofi Pasteur. So Mexico, as I mentioned, is the second largest pharmaceutical market in Latin America behind Brazil. And the country also features a growing and aging population. These are issues that we need to address: an aging population, multiple but underfunded state-run health insurance systems, and a small but rapidly developing private health insurance system. The flagging economy, which entered recession before the pandemic, coupled with the measures of President López Obrador's government to balance public finances, have impaired the development of the domestic pharma and healthcare sector. Among the most affected segments are institutional drug sales, stemming from a revamp of the public procurement rules, and the public social security health insurance systems, which have suffered from cuts in funding. And you know, the recession doesn't help, and the recession provoked by the pandemic doesn't help either. Nevertheless, some segments, such as generic drugs, medical tourism, and private health insurance, continue to grow at an accelerated pace. Now, I would like you to take a look at the providers of COVID vaccines to Mexico. This is the agreement that the Mexican government has reached with these providers. As you can see, Mexico has diversified the providers of vaccines. We rely most of all on AstraZeneca's vaccine, but we also have reached an agreement with Pfizer, with CanSino, the Chinese producer, with the Russian government to get the Sputnik vaccine, with Sinovac, another Chinese vaccine, and we also are expected to benefit from the COVAX mechanism. But still, you know, we are suffering from delivery delays from the vaccine providers. I'm sure you all remember what happened to Pfizer at the beginning of this year, that decided to improve its production capabilities, and it stopped the deliverance of vaccines to all the world. So that was a major problem. Now Russia is also experiencing deliveries, delayed in the delivery of vaccines, because Russia has mentioned it needs to prioritize the vaccination of Russians, which is entirely understandable. But in the case of Mexico, we have been able to advance the immunization of the healthcare sector, doctors, nurses, the education sector, people over 50 years, and now we are trying to advance the immunization of people under 49. But the progression of this process is very, very slow, due mostly, as I mentioned, to deliveries that are not arriving as expected, in the time expected. Now, to finish my views on this topic, this pandemic has underlined the relevance of health to diplomacy, to international politics, to economics, and to security, among other relevant issues. Despite its universal impacts, the SARS-CoV-2 disease has not prompted a genuine global health diplomacy. We lack diplomacy. We can see efforts made by a bunch of countries, but not a multilateral approach to sort this problem out. And this has happened for a number of reasons, mostly, but not exclusively, in my view, due to the approach assumed by the Trump administration. The US resigned during the Trump administration to pave the way for a response, a proper response to the pandemic. Then we also have the crisis of multilateral institutions. That's another fact we must take into consideration. We are also witnessing exacerbated nationalism. First comes me, and I will deal with the rest later. But first, it's me. That's what we are witnessing in today's world. Then we have lacking confidence in institutions, a perception that the World Health Organization has not properly reacted to the challenge. There is also misinformation, infodemics, infodemia. And we also have the anti-vaxxers organization. So there is a number of obstacles that prevent us from developing a genuine global health diplomacy strategy. Despite for calls of a more decisive role played by states, because when every time we have a crisis, we say, oh, we must rely on states. This is a fact. This happened in 2008, remember, 2009. Every time we face a crisis, we say, we must rely on states. And COVID-19 times is not the exception. We are calling for a more decisive role by states. But it's been only a bunch of them in isolation who have coined a response increasing their soft power, or there's only a bunch of them who have been able to reach agreement with a very limited amount of states to provide some relief in today's crisis. I'm thinking about, for instance, the arrangement made between Mexico and Argentina and AstraZeneca to deliver vaccines to these and other countries. But these are very limited approaches to the problem. The problem is huge, of course, and it needs a more broader response. And big pharma and insurance companies have extensively profited from the pandemic, and that's a fact. So prior to the pandemic, and that's the other issue, several inequalities prevail in the world, and the disease exacerbated them. This makes vaccination a major challenge. If you see this map, you may see something that we already knew, that some countries, especially low-income countries, will reach 60–70% of their population vaccinated until 2023. And that is unacceptable, yes? So we must do something about that. There's a need for global health diplomacy where actors involved and relevant to health sit together and find common grounds despite their conflicting interests. An important step would be temporary compulsory licenses. The WTO is speaking a lot about this, and President Biden, the US President Biden, seems to be in favor of this proposal to release temporary compulsory licenses that could allow governments to locally manufacture or import generic versions of the treatment or vaccines without the patent holder's consent. Of course, Big Pharma opposes this compulsory licenses possibility. But this way, vaccination could reach more countries and people, and we could accelerate, in fact, vaccination throughout the world. So in light of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, key issues to look at are, among others, reconfiguration of international relations, the repositioning of certain countries that were important players and now are becoming more prominent players in the international arena. We also have to look at the role of science and technology. We are relying heavily on science and technology to face the disease, and science and technology is becoming more and more relevant, probably more than ever during this crisis. We also need to analyze global governance and, of course, business and trade. And I have here these figures just to make a comparison between the two countries that are organizing this virtual seminar. we are very different, Mexico and Serbia, in terms of population, in terms of the area. We have some similarities when it comes to the Human Development Index, but you can see the figures, for example, of confirmed cases and diseases in Mexico and Serbia. Serbia is a smaller country. My understanding, but I would love to hear more about this, is that Serbia is doing pretty well in vaccination. The rate of vaccination of Serbia is higher than Mexico's. And well, this leads me to my final point. Does the size matter? I wonder, because it seems to me that the smaller the country, the better the vaccination rate is. Well, in general terms, of course, there are exceptions. And we know smaller countries where vaccination is not progressing rapidly. New Zealand, for instance, is very small, but it has only advanced vaccination in terms of 1/10 of its population. So we have Uruguay and Latin America. Chile are doing pretty well. Israel is being mentioned as a country that is doing pretty well. Canada is a huge country when it comes to its territory, but it's small when it comes to its population. And we have Bahrain, we have Bhutan, smaller countries, and they have very good vaccination rates. The US is big. It has vaccinated more than half of its population. China apparently has vaccinated 250 million people, which is good, but still that's 1 out of 6. 1 out of 6 Chinese has been vaccinated, but there's a long way to go. But the pandemic is under control in China, as we already mentioned, so there's no need to worry, apparently. Russia instead has very slow progress in vaccination. It needs to go faster. That's being required by the population. And also China, as I mentioned, has the challenges of delivering vaccines to the world. So what I believe is that we need more information, technical cooperation, and best practices sharing between the countries, which is something that lead us to this webinar. Serbia has a lot to tell us, and we have a lot to tell you about, the management of this disease. So it's very important that we share information, that we share technical cooperation and best practices. Also, the authorization of Russian and Chinese vaccines, we should push WHO and Western countries to go beyond politics, because now we are facing the problem of, that if you are vaccinated with these Russian or Chinese vaccines, you cannot enter Western countries or Canada or the US, because these vaccines have not been approved for emergency use. So we need to go beyond politics. And of course, we need better health systems, improved vaccine production capabilities in countries. And most of all, and I will stop here, we need to look at the forest, not only the tree. This year, we are commemorating 20 since the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 attacks against the US, and I mentioned this, made terrorism the top priority in the world. And I believe that we pay so much attention to terrorism that prevented us from looking at other relevant issues, such as epidemic and pandemics. And we are facing today the costs of looking only at one tree, at that time, the tree of terrorism. And now we are probably running the risk of making the same mistake by looking only at COVID-19 and forgetting about the rest of the agenda. This is the rest of the agenda. We must pay attention to the other issues relevant to international relations, including climate change, including energy challenges, including the ODS, food problems and production capability problems, and such and such. So let's look at the forest, please, not only at the tree. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Rosas, for this comprehensive and accurate presentation on our topic. And I would like to pass the floor to my colleagues on the Serbian Diplomatic Academy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rosas, for your instructive presentation. The second lecture is on the vaccine diplomacy. Before I give the floor to Mr. Zelic, let me say a few words about him. Mr. Zelic is one of the leading experts in the field of pharmacy in our country. He graduated from the Faculty of Pharmacy at University of Belgrade. I have to mention that Mr. Zelic was also our student and attended almost 10 years ago the basic program of diplomatic and consular training at the Diplomatic Academy. He was working for the leading pharmaceutical companies in the Balkan region, has been employed for 12 years in the Agency for Medicines and Medical Devices of Serbia as a manager for international cooperation, European integrations, and public relations at the agency. He is also a member of many international organizations as the representative of the Republic of Serbia, Council of Europe, World Health Organization, European Union bodies. He is also a part-time lecturer at several faculties in Serbia and abroad, and he has been awarded many times for his work in the field of pharmacy. I would add one more interesting fact about Mr. Zelic, if he allows me. He is also a writer and script writer with 3 books of fiction and 2 graphic novels. Mr. Zelic, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful introduction, and I really much liked the presentation given before. I will speak without slides, but I hope that you can hear me well and that I will be as interesting as I can, just being me without any visual aids. But I will say more about vaccine diplomacy. This is somewhat a new path in international relations, and I would like to emphasize that the presentation I will give, the speech, will be coming very much from my personal experience, being one way or another on the front line of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, I'm not a healthcare worker working with the patients directly, but I speak with patients every single day. I advise them about vaccines, and I communicate with all different stakeholders, both in Serbia and abroad. So I had a really incredible journey last year and a half. It was very traumatic for sure, but now when we see hope, the light at the end of the tunnel, we can say that this was a biggest challenge in all of our professional careers working in the healthcare sector, especially the ones dealing with approval and procurement of pharmaceuticals and especially vaccines. So I will try to just give some introduction about and always come back to the role of diplomacy, because even though I graduated as valedictorian of Diplomatic Academy, I didn't expect to be working so much with the diplomatic activities like I did during the pandemic and even today. And ever from the onset of the pandemic, we can say that we have been, as the world, in a sort of war. There has been many different metaphors how we can explain to ourselves what is going on, but the fight against invisible enemy, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, has been the most common one, and we can say that this indeed has been World War III for humanity against an enemy we could never foresee. Since December 2019 in China and the declaration of pandemic in March 11 by the WHO, we had a very quick escalation of things, and then wave after wave of infections worldwide. Especially the most dangerous ones are the new variants of alpha, beta, gamma, and delta strain of the virus that we talk about a lot these days. And the question remains, will the vaccine really save us against any new type of mutation the virus can do? Right now, we stand at 181 million infected, and we are not certain the number of deaths because the calculations vary, but between the 3.93 to 8.3 million dead makes the COVID-19 pandemic the 8th deadliest pandemic / epidemic in human history, and it just surpassed, overcome the actually Mexico smallpox epidemic in 1520, starting with the intrusion from Europe and moving up towards the number 7 or even 5th place in the history of the deadliest epidemics or pandemics that we experienced in civilization of mankind. But from the very first day, we had the diplomacy acting and fighting COVID-19. We can all remember the first days when the United Nations, especially the WHO, was telling us that this is really something dangerous. And we may remember the former pandemic the WHO declared, the swine flu pandemic 10 years ago. I was there fighting against that pandemic as well. And it seemed that it was nothing special. It was not so deadly, but we cannot forget more than 150,000 dead people from that pandemic alone. And the COVID-19 took a while to suppress the lethal effects of the swine flu, but after it did, it escalated without practically any control. The CDC, the ECDC, the Center for Drug Control of US and Europe also were involved, and many other international organizations and national bodies alerted us that and experts told us that this is really something to be reckoned with, but unfortunately many politicians didn't listen. But the diplomats already had a major role in saving people. I think we probably in Mexico had the same situation in Serbia. We all still remember how our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our embassies saved a lot of stranded travelers on airports around the world, sending our planes to bring them back home and save them from a very difficult situation. So the diplomacy had to work overtime in a global crisis, but we needed to catch up on the response, especially when concerned with difficult decisions like cutting travel altogether, influencing the global economy, and many other issues that were eventually resolved when the people started dying. That's where the politicians really took notice and understood that this is not something that can put under the rug, that this is something that affects us all. And that is when us, the healthcare experts, came into focus. We were expected to find a miracle cure overnight. It wasn't possible, but with joint effort from the global scientific community, the research centers, and the global pharmaceutical industry, we managed to do exactly that. Of course, the regulators, the ones that I represent worldwide, were included from the beginning. But let me just remind ourselves one other aspect that was mentioned in the previous presentation, but was also, let's say, the announcement of the vaccine or the pandemic diplomacy. That is the first glimpse was the protective equipment. We were lacking masks, we were lacking protective gear, gloves, suits, and we lacked respirators, the medical devices that were essential for keeping the patients with heavy type of COVID-19 alive. They were very short. There were shortages of this complex equipment, and we had to fight and try to get it with the use of diplomatic connections with the producers. Eventually, we were managing to overcome these shortages, but this was the first onset of what will come next. There was also a quest for a cure. A cure still doesn't exist. We still don't have a medication that will treat COVID-19 because antiviral medication takes a lot more time to develop than a vaccine. A vaccine is something that will protect you from the virus, and a cure for COVID-19 is still not conclusive. But there were, of course, shortages of everything, and this essential medicine and the supplies were provided, as mentioned before, from China, from Russian Federation, from the West. We had especially a good help in disinfectants and disinfecting the whole hospitals that came from Russian Federation. but we were also able to produce masks and give them to Italy and some other countries as well. So these were the first steps. When we started developing vaccine, I think I talk about the global medical and pharmaceutical community. We had some previous experiences with coronaviruses. We didn't start from the 0 point, and that is very important to know, because at one of the key elements that was a question, how is it possible to have vaccines so quickly when we all know this is an overstatement, and a lot of people didn't know anything about the development of medicines whatsoever, but when they read something online, they assumed that they knew everything about the development of medicines. Indeed, it takes 10 or plus years to develop a treatment, but when we talk about COVID-19 vaccines, we must take into account that they were built upon existing platforms, and also the exchange of information, the publication of scientific data was most transparent in the history of science. So as soon as we got any information about any new development, it was being published in the journals, or it can be read even before that. And also, we were in line, especially with the help of WHO, on all the developing emerging clinical trials of new vaccines, or the development of existing clinical trials, like with the SARS and MERS viruses, that stopped because there was no financial interest in developing these vaccines fully. Of course, the accelerated procedures and the role of regulatory bodies, especially the US FDA, the European Medicines Agency, regulators in Russia, China, and even Serbia, was essential, so that we all worked together in creating this environment where we don't need these 10 plus years to develop and approve and test a new product, but we were able to work in parallel and essentially get these products much quicker available to the citizens of the world. Of course, one of the vaccines that was first made public was this famous Oxford, or now we call it AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK, of course, followed by the smaller German biotech company, BioNTech, biotechnological company, which was then partnered with Pfizer. Sputnik V, or GAM-COVID-2, as it is officially called by Gamaleya Institute in Russian Federation, was also an early enter into the race, and the People's Republic of China, Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines were advertised, even though it took them maybe a longer time to develop, because they use a technology that uses the full vaccine, inactivated vaccine, and therefore it means that it needs more time to be developed, and it's actually much more expensive. The Moderna as well was introduced very quickly, and the so-called race, which vaccine will be first to be registered, first to be used on a national or international level, could begin. It can be compared to the race to the space between the Soviet Union and the US, but and obviously that's why the Sputnik V vaccine is called like that, and it is in fact the first vaccine that was registered, even though this was put under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of questioning whether it was fully in line with the regulatory requirements, but nevertheless the Sputnik V vaccine did get the first registration in the world, followed by Pfizer, BioNTech, then Sinopharm, Sinovac, Moderna, and AstraZeneca being registered. But at that time, we could say that from the point that you can have a vaccine available to your people and really put the first jab into the first arm, it had to spend a little bit more time. And the UK was, of course, one of the first countries that enabled its citizens to be vaccinated, and one of the main reasons was that they left actually the EU right prior to this pandemic, and they were independent in a way, and criticized a lot for doing this the way they did, but with the country so big and so influenced in the worst possible way by COVID-19, they took a very difficult but brave political decision to approve the vaccines as quickly as possible and to start the vaccination. So Of course, some other countries followed, and we can say that in Europe, after UK and Switzerland, Serbia was actually the third country to start vaccinating its people. Before us, it was available in some Middle East countries, some countries in Far East, but the EU was a little bit slower in that, and it showed over and over, especially when the procurement issues came, that sometimes too big of a system is maybe a bad thing in these situations, counting that if you have a contract with a vaccine manufacturer that this is set in stone really doesn't mean exactly that, because smaller countries like Serbia, who were able to negotiate, to work and cut through red wire to get the vaccines as quickly as possible, were able to do something that huge systems like the EU could not. Of course, there was a big talk about COVAX program. We are a part of it. We gave money to be part of COVAX, and this program, even though now it works much better than in the beginning, was also under a lot of criticism for not providing what we all expected. But like I said at the beginning, this is a whole new world, and all of us as regulators, we are not diplomats, we are not politicians, and we are put into a lot of pressure and expectations. But fortunately, especially when I come from my agency and talk about Serbia, we were never pressured to do anything beyond what is our job. We were staying late, we were staying on weekends, we didn't have holidays for so many months now, but we did everything by the book. We did every single element of the evaluation of vaccines as it is defined by the law. We just organized our work and focused solely on these tasks, and that's how we got the results. So the result of development of vaccines, but also the approval, was the quickness of all of it was done because we knew that every single day of our work meant people's lives. And that is something that when you are tired, when you don't have the energy, then you think about the people waiting for that vaccines, and you find the energy and you find the time. Of course, from the onset, the negotiations Serbia had and the success we have with vaccines was based on good diplomatic relations with both East and West, like we did in all the Yugoslavia. And a very interesting moment came when the first applications came to our agency. On December the 2nd, 2020, was the first application by Pfizer-BioNTech, and a day later by Sputnik or Covidvac, December the 3rd. So practically the race was on, even when we talk about the registration as well. With the absolute focus by our agency, we were able to approve the first vaccine in Serbia on December 24th, and the 23rd, and the September 24th, the first jab was given to our Prime Minister, Mesana Brnabić, and several members of the crisis team. Of course, it was all, once again, a result of great international cooperation, but also the boldness and the intelligence to not put all the eggs in one basket, but to calculate and talk with different possible providers, and we talked with everybody. Of course, from the beginning, that is something that came as a result of our international cooperation and our international understanding that Serbia needs to work on both levels. Of course, we are approaching the EU, but we have good relations with especially People's Republic of China, with Russian Federation, with the US. We try to work with everybody and always in the interest of our patients. Of course, this success in procurement meant that we were under huge pressure to work overtime in our agency. I can remember the New Year's Eve when I was giving statement to China and the National Broadcasting News Agency, and we worked every single day, and we approved every single batch of vaccines coming to our country, so that we enabled our citizens to be certain that we didn't just accept somebody else's approval. We did, the Serbian experts assessed every single batch of every vaccine coming to our country, and that meant a big certainty for our people that these vaccines are really as quality and efficacious and safe as we are saving. Of course, there were a lot of challenges. For example, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine at the beginning had to be stored at -80 degrees Celsius. The Sputnik V vaccine can be at -20, but it can be used only 5 hours after it's being unfrozen, and many other challenges, especially for African and some other countries. These would be obstacles that would prevent them for using these vaccines altogether. But for Serbia, we were ready. We knew what we were facing, and of course, we were able to overcome all these obstacles one at a time, or even several at the same time. So the situation right now for several months is that we have a US-Germany Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine approved in Serbia, then Gam-Covid-2 by Russian Federation, Sinopharm Verocell from China, and AstraZeneca Covid Shield from UK, Sweden, and also being produced in India. And this means that we have, similar to Mexico, but very early on, vaccines from both East and West. We had the vaccines from different platforms, so it's mRNA, also a viral vector vaccine, and classical inactivated vaccine, and enabled the people who had the opportunity to choose themselves which vaccine they want to take, to choose. If you can even choose based on your let's say geopolitical standpoint. So if you are a Russophile, then you will choose a Russian vaccine, or if you prefer China, you can use a Chinese vaccine. If you prefer Western countries, then you can use AstraZeneca or US Pfizer vaccine. And the choice that we gave to our citizens enabled us at the beginning to get a huge vaccination rates, because people, it was like a Swedish buffet of vaccines, as one famous Croatian writer said when she came. And this is also part of vaccine diplomacy. We allowed foreigners to be vaccinated in Serbia as well. What happened next, of course, is that many more vaccines were registered worldwide, but we still stand at 4. We expect Moderna and Johnson & Johnson to be registered in Serbia soon. But the biggest issue, of course, were the shortages. The shortages of vaccines came from the very beginning, and it was a big question. How is Serbia so successful? How do you get so many vaccines for your people? And, for example, EU countries don't. But like I said before, the smaller countries were able to have this specific position to maneuver somewhere where the big ones couldn't. And like I said, when we talk about vaccine diplomacy in particular, we always said that we had friends both from East and from the West, but the vaccine diplomacy didn't work towards Serbia. And we, of course, paid for all the vaccines that we got, but the vaccine diplomacy came from Serbia to the region. So there are many cases where our president, Aleksandar Vučić, our prime minister, Minister of Health, Dr. Lončar, welcomed the vaccines coming with these big planes from China, Russia, from UK, India, or big trucks coming from Pfizer production facilities in Belgium. But on the other hand, we were also the ones putting vaccines on planes or driving them to countries in the region. And this has been an incredible example how Serbia, who was not so long ago struggling economically and in many other political issues, is now able to come to aid to the countries which were a part of former Yugoslavia. And even much more than that. So we donated Pfizer vaccines to North Macedonia. We donated AstraZeneca vaccines to Bosnia and Herzegovina. We donated Sputnik V vaccine to Montenegro, and we even donated vaccines to Czech Republic, which is part of EU. Of course, when I mentioned vaccine diplomacy, it went beyond us bringing vaccines to another country. Foreigners can come to Serbia and be vaccinated, and it can be either, it's of course planned with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but furthermore, some celebrities, I mentioned a Croatian writer, some people from sports, so coming from EU countries that were vaccinated in Serbia, but also common people and some business partners as well. So we were able to bring people, they call it vaccine tourism, but I don't like that term. I prefer to say that this is in fact also a way of vaccine diplomacy that exists nowadays, and we have to reckon with it. And Serbia was quite successful at one point doing just that, and we continue to help our neighbors any way we can. I myself also had an opportunity to cooperate with colleagues from both European Medicines Agency. We have regular meetings and cooperation, but also everybody from the region could call me anytime, and we had many consultations, both countries which are acceding towards the EU or the EU member states. We had many consultations, and this was also a sort of diplomacy that was involving vaccines as well. Of course, when we talk about vaccines, one of the biggest issues now is their safety. How do we convince people that vaccines are really safe? Well, we use scientific data, and I, as a pharmacist, always come back to the facts. For example, on today's report, and we have daily reports, we have only 1,018 reports of adverse reactions to vaccines from the day one, and we have administered more than 5 million doses of vaccines in Serbia right now, and almost all of these are mild to reactions, usually swelling in the arm or high temperature for a few days, or a headache, muscle pain. So nothing special and nothing with long-term effects. We have only 9 cases of more serious adverse drug reactions for the vaccines in Serbia. Of course, none of those include the already infamous AstraZeneca or Johnson or even Pfizer serious adverse reactions. Of course, we didn't maybe give so many vaccines, but definitely we can say that vaccines are more than safe, and people can be free to get vaccinated, all types of all populations. I can always only add a very important part of our success in vaccination is that we have a national producer of vaccines, which will become a producer of Sputnik V. Well, it already became. Torlak, Institute Torlak actually started production of vaccines in 1927, the BCG vaccine and the polio vaccine 3 years later. So it has almost 100 years of tradition in vaccine manufacturing, and this has been the most important commodity in the last months, and probably more worth than gold or diamonds today. If you can produce vaccines, you can produce security for your own people, but also you can compete on international market as well. So definitely Torlak, as a big manufacturer of vaccines in the past, is now back on the path of old glory and a strategic assessment asset for our government, because it's 100% government-owned company. I can only say a few other things that are also interesting for a diplomatic point of view. We have a great cooperation, and I work with the Council of Europe, Interpol, and WHO on counterfeit or falsified products. And we had a lot of these cases, especially in the beginning, where we had huge shortages of vaccines. We had big reports and alerts by Interpol, and the possible future danger of use of used vials and being refilled and placed in the underdeveloped countries. So this is a big threat. But there were many internet frauds, traffic of dark side of internet, the dark net, and even real cases of falsified vaccines being found even in Europe, in Poland, in Austria, but there was a case in Mexico as well, and in South Africa and in China too. So we have to be very careful about these issues, and this also needs diplomatic connections and understanding between different stakeholders. So this is an important issue, and we must not let it diminish the trust we have in the system of providing vaccines, because these vaccines are usually sold outside the legal supply chain. But there have been other falsified or dubious products related to COVID-19 tests, results, miracle cures. And this has been a big issue that needs also understanding and cooperation on international level, because these criminal groups are working internationally. They work with cross-border activities, and we need cross-border cooperation to stop them, and even on diplomatic level. Finally, I will come back to a communication issue. This is also a big topic, and of course, something that we need to address as a world, because right now with the infodemic and with the fake news, it is not something that happens in one country. We have to work together to find a solution and to act quickly. I myself am working as a person responsible for public relations. I personally go on media, and I can say, for example, this is a fascinating fact, that in 2019 we had 1,013 media reports about our agency in Serbia, but in 2020 it rose up 5.5 times more. So it was 5,622 reports in the media. It's a huge number for Serbia. And then in 2021, up to date, it's 6,266. So you can see that we are in media every single day, several times. Everything we do is put under a magnifying glass, both by the mass media, but also being repeated on social media. The social media is the primary source of fake news. I was combating fake news on many occasions. There were alerts that we recalled AstraZeneca vaccine, or that we didn't approve vaccines, Pfizer vaccines at all in Serbia. This was all being circulated on social media. We alerted Facebook and Twitter and other sources of this misinformation, so they took down this fake information, but it is never quickly enough. You can see 1,000 shares, tens of or maybe hundreds of thousands of people has already seen that fake information or fake document, and what can you do about it? You have to repeat over and over what is the truth, but still you will always have strong opposition against it. International communication, I had the pleasure of also dealing with some foreign press as well, and they were more than interested in what's going on in Serbia, especially in the early days of our vaccine success. Both regional media, but even Chinese media was reporting about what's going on in Serbia. French and some other international media was calling, and I had a very big challenge of replying to these requests, and of course representing my country on the best possible way. Finally, finishing off with just a few more information, I can say that right now, as the end of the June approaches, we have 3 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines administered worldwide, and we have a huge number of candidate vaccines, but I don't think that any of those will, or maybe some will, but not many, question the supremacy of the vaccines that we already have registered. But 73 vaccines are in clinical trials, and as I said, 308 candidate vaccines in various stages of development. So as you can see, when we started working towards the vaccines, then we worked very, very ambitiously on worldwide level. But what is interesting, we have 18 registered vaccines in the world right now. China has 7, Russia 4, US with other countries 3, UK 1, India 1, Kazakhstan 1, and Iran 1, but more are to come from Cuba, Canada, France are near registration. And of course, what is needed right now is that we don't only vaccinate the most vulnerable groups, like the elderly and the people with chronic disease, and the vaccines are safe for all of them, I can assure you, and I assure all patients in Serbia as well on daily basis, because I talk with them every single day. But we also approved on global level vaccines for breastfeeding women, for pregnant women, and the new challenge are the children. Pfizer vaccine has been already approved for ages 12 up, then the Sinopharm vaccines for ages 3 to 17 in China, and Moderna and other vaccines are soon to follow with the new clinical trials. Of course, this has all been done on a most highest ethical level of assessment, and of course protecting the rights of the patients being involved. Finally, finishing off with what is the perspective. We talked about and we heard that the big players are talking about with big pharma how to diminish the constraints provided by the patent rights, so the generic vaccines will probably emerge very, very soon. But the provider of vaccines, AstraZeneca, with 3 billion doses, Pfizer, BioNTech with 1.3 billion doses, then Sputnik, Sinopharm, Sinovac, and Johnson & Johnson with 1 billion each, and finally Moderna and Comirnaty with 500 or 600 million. This seems enough, but really it isn't, because we are talking about the third dose. We are talking about this being like a seasonal vaccination. Many questions still unanswered, but the global scientific community, interlinked with the diplomatic community, did their best at providing us with the resources to fight this. Serbia today, the latest news is at 48% of adult population being vaccinated. This is a great result, but that means that we are still a long way from 60 or 70% that we need to be receiving this mass immunity that we want. But we will do as much as we can in the next days, months, and years. This is not the probably the last pandemic we will see. But finally, finishing off with a statement by Professor Walter Ornstein from Emory University at Atlanta, I can say that vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations save lives. So we have to trust the vaccines, we have to provide the vaccines, and change the perception in those who are still not vaccinated. And I'm sure we will be successful at that, because as a humanity, we can do anything. We went to the moon. We conquered COVID-19 with vaccines. We are almost there, and I'm sure we will continue on the path of success as humanity and nations individually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zelic. We enjoyed the lectures of both experts.
Thank you so very much. On behalf of the Matías Romero Institute and our director, Alejandro Alday, who had a previous engagement, I wish to thank you. I wish to thank our speakers for their illuminating comments, really illuminating comments that provide such a wide and profound view of the understanding of this important subject to us all. We have a few questions, of course, but we only have like about 7 minutes left. So I will try to reduce the questions to a few concepts here. We have one very interesting question from Milos Markovic from Serbia. It says, the COVAX mechanism is receiving a lot of criticism, mostly because it lacks of efficiency. If you were given the opportunity to renegotiate the COVAX, what would you change? Anyone?
I can start. Well, concerning the COVAX, of course, it was a very ambitious idea, but from the onset, it needed more political support. So these issues really need to be elevated to the highest political level. From the onset, it was like Professor Cristina already said, everybody took care of themselves, and there was no empathy, no sense that this is a global problem. But I think that the global solution and solutions like COVAX, especially for countries who cannot count on this maneuvering or don't have the financial capabilities, is essential. So we need to trust into COVAX, and we need to support it as much as we can, because it will mean life and death for many people in many countries that we don't talk about right now. We think about ourselves first and foremost, and that is understandable. But at one point we have to think about others, and one point we have to we need more time for COVAX. Definitely we were not ready for such an ambitious plan, but I think that on long term this is exactly what we need on global scale.
What I believe is that we should probably attach the COVAX system to the temporary compulsory licenses so that we can get generic versions of already existing vaccines. That way, I believe we could reach more people, we could have more people vaccinated.
Thank you. Well, our friend here, Patricio Bañuelos, made a few comments on China and its policies in vaccine policies. Very, very ample questions, but what would you think of comments that point to China for its policies towards the ASEAN member countries?
But in what respect? I mean, it's very general, the question.
Very general, yes. Let me see.
Yeah, I don't get it. Yeah.
Let's jump to another one here. What opportunities can Mexico develop to promote access to the vaccine in all countries, as well as to donate vaccines and equipment, considering examples in other countries?
I believe that we have somehow envisioned this approach when we negotiated together with Argentina and the Carlos Slim Foundation and the AstraZeneca and University of Oxford access to the AstraZeneca vaccine. But still, both Argentina and Mexico are having a hard time with the pandemic, and we need to advance vaccination. So I believe this is a situation where, similar to what Russia has right now, right? It needs to vaccinate this population, but it also has to deliver vaccines. So we have not compromised vaccination to other countries, or we have done so in a very limited way. But in order to advance this, we must resolve first the situation internally, I believe. But we have, of course, to push for COVAX and the compulsory licenses, generic versions of vaccines and that all. And Mexico has been very supportive of multilateralism and WHO, and that's a very important job we can do at this time.
Exactly. Well, unfortunately, I believe just time is running up, just enough to thank our speakers. Maria Cristina, Rosas, thank you so very much for your kind words and your kind intervention here. I sincerely appreciate Mr. Pavle Zelic and our colleagues, of course, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Serbia. Thank you so very much. I appreciate the intervention and the help, of course, of Ambassador Konik and Ambassador Felix in Serbia and in Mexico. And of course, our director, Alejandro Alday, and our colleagues who have been behind the scenes, organizing all the event. And of course, our viewers, our friends there in the internet and Facebook who have accompanied us in this journey. I believe there are some closing comments from the embassy. Please go ahead.
Okay, at the end of today's conference, I would like to thank once again our lecturers. During their presentations, we had the opportunity to hear and learn many important and useful facts in the field of global health diplomacy and vaccine diplomacy. Professor Rosas and Mr. Zelic have confirmed through their lectures the importance of diplomacy in strengthening international cooperation and solidarity in many areas, as well as its contribution to facing the new problems of and challenges of the modern world. Thank you once again to the Instituto Matías Romero for the cooperation in organizing today's conference. We enjoyed the lectures of both experts, and regards to all. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hvala najlepše.
Gracias, doctora.
Estamos fuera.
Gracias.
Listo. Todavía aparece live.
Sí. Ya ahorita queda un minuto, por eso. Sí.